it's Janelle and welcome back to another episode of Treknalysis. Worf, son of Mogh, Starfleet's only Klingon officer, fall guy for the Klingon Empire, enjoyer of prune juice, rougher-upper of Garak, and father to one Alexander Rozhenko.
Date of birth.
Father of the Year, ladies and gentlemen! Now, the ongoing meme online is how terrible of a father Worf is. Heck, I've even cracked a few jokes about it. But because I sometimes take memes too seriously, today I want to take a look at the Next Gen Season 5 episode New Ground, where Worf's son Alexander arrives on the Enterprise to live with his father, and look at Worf's parenting style to determine if he really is as bad of a father as the memes say he is.
Worf faces an emotional reunion with a forgotten son.
You don't care about me. All you care about is your honor.
But before I go further, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I talk a lot about Star Trek, video games, and whatever else I feel like talking about. And if you'd like to help support the channel, consider becoming a member. Be great to have you aboard. The Enterprise arrives at the planet B'Elanna 3. No, not that B'Elanna. They're helping test a new method of propulsion being developed for starships. And Geordi is the only one excited about it.
We are going to see something that people will talk about for years.
This should be interesting.
Very exciting.
The new method is called a soliton wave, but in reality, it's warp surfing. Cowabunga, dudes.
A ship just generates a soliton wave and then rides it through space like a surfboard.
Meanwhile, Worf's mom is calling him, and I'm sorry, Worf's parents are adorable and I love them. We only see his father Sergei once in the show, but we catch his mom Helena twice. And not nearly enough for either of them. Anyway, Helena is bringing Alexander on board for a visit. Now, for all of you who are new here, back in Season 2, an old flame of Worf's, a half-Klingon, half-human woman named K'Ehleyr, arrived on the Enterprise for a diplomatic mission, and she and Worf rekindled their romance. On the holodeck of all places. Worf wanted to take the oath, or get married, but K'Ehleyr wasn't ready, and even though they had strong feelings for each other, they ended up parting ways. About a year and a half later, K'Ehleyr comes on board the Enterprise for a second time, only this time accompanied by the galaxy's oldest 1.5-year-old Klingon boy. Gee, of all the characters to have a kid they didn't know about, who would have guessed Worf when Riker was on the ship? K'Ehleyr wanted to take the oath then, but in the time since they had, a holodeck misadventure, Worf was discommendated from the Klingon Empire to prevent civil war and carries a dishonor that would carry over to Alexander. However, he does promise to be Alexander's friend even if he can't acknowledge him as his son. K'Ehleyr was later killed by another Klingon, Duras, after discovering that his father was guilty of the crimes Worf's father was accused, and Worf avenged her death. As the sole surviving parent, Worf acknowledged Alexander as his son and sent him to live with his parents since they could provide a stable home for him to grow up in. Okay, now you're all caught up. Helena and a recast Alexander beam over, and Helena is happy to see Worf again, but Alexander is less than thrilled to see his father.
How long can you stay?
I'm not going back.
No guest should be admitted without the date of their departure settled.
We cut to 10 forward and find Worf asking Helena why Alexander thinks he's staying on the Enterprise.
Lapsang, please.
Ooh. Helena just ordered one of the few teas I can't stand. If you've seen enough of my videos, you'll notice that I'm a bit of a tea connoisseur, and I like almost every tea I've tried. Black teas, green teas, white teas, oolongs, I'm not super picky. Lapsang Souchong is a Chinese black tea that's been smoked over a fire to get a piney flavor. And it's so strong that even I can't drink it. I mean, I like a strong tea myself, but Lapsang is just so woodsy. Even the smell is off-putting. If you're getting into tea, don't try that one until you're ready. Other than price being an issue, try almost any other Chinese black tea because they're usually pretty mild and have a nice, almost cocoa-y flavor. Tea aside, and Helena likes hers really strong, Helena explains that Alexander is a fine boy and even reminds her of Worf at that age. She and Sergei were happy that he came to live with them. However, since they're getting older, they're having a hard time keeping up with him full-time and are just ready to be grandparents. which is entirely fair. I get why Worf sent Alexander to them, but at some point, and as Helena points out, Alexander needs his father for guidance, and Worf needs to step up and be a dad. It would be one thing if Worf dropped Alexander off by his parents for a couple of hours once in a while so he can have a few prune juices with the boys. But full time? That's asking a lot of Worf's aging parents. The other issue is that Alexander has a bit of a problem with telling the truth.
My son is a liar.
Alexander isn't on board for 10 minutes and already he's dishonored his father. But he could have a promising career in the Obsidian Order.
Well, the truth is usually just an excuse for lack of imagination.
Helena has to get going, though, but she leaves Worf with one last bit of advice.
You must do what you think is best for him. That's all a parent can hope to do.
Put a pin in this quote for later. It'll come up again. Worf and Alexander head on over to Miss Kyle, his future teacher, to register him for school.
Did you enjoy going to school on Earth?
Yes.
And that was a filthy lie!
Never tell the truth and a lie will do.
Miss Kyle and her Princess Leia in Cloud City hairstyle introduces herself to Alexander, but Alexander is looking around the room and doesn't respond. Well, this is awkward. Now let's consider something. Even though Alexander looks, about 10? He's probably around 2 or 3 years old in the show's timeline. It could be that he's still pretty young and Worf just needs to work with him on social interaction. On the other hand, he's already been in school and he should already have an idea of how to interact with people. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this one. Worf tries to get Alexander to respond to Miss Kyle's question about spelling his last name, Rozhenko, while she fills out his profile, only for Miss Kyle to shut that down right away.
The teacher asked you a question.
It doesn't matter. I think I can figure it out.
No, lady, you're not helping. Look, I don't have kids, nor do I pretend to be an expert on them, but parents are the first ones to teach basic communication skills and social interaction to their kids, and a lot of that learning comes from real-world experience. Eye contact, forming clear sentences, being polite, stuff like that. Even if Alexander fails to spell his last name correctly, it's not so much a spelling test, but learning basic communication skills. And as a teacher, I would think she would know that. But then again, maybe she just didn't want to put pressure on the kid. He's getting thrown into a new environment. But, okay, let's move on to the next thing.
Date of birth.
This is usually where the Worf is a terrible father meme comes into play. Heck, I even cracked a joke about it at the start of the video. Now, a father not knowing his kid's birthday is pretty bad and usually the start of any number of therapy sessions. But let's consider something. Though not to excuse it, don't get me wrong. Worf hasn't spent much time with Alexander up to this point. Heck, up to a year ago, he didn't even know he had a son, let alone a birth on a particular day and a reason to remember that day. For Alexander, his birthday was the most important day of his life. But for Worf?
It was Tuesday.
That being said, yes, Worf should have committed that day to memory after finding out he had a son, if only to avoid faux pas like this.
43rd day of MacTac. Stardate 43205.
Yes, of course.
Deanna, clear your calendar.
I apologize for being late, Captain. I was detained in school.
Giving swirlies to the new recruits again, Mr. Wolf? Picard tries to talk to Worf about various security protocols, but keeps getting interrupted by Miss Kyle calling about placement exams for Alexander, and Beverly calling about medical exams. Picard, however, is a pretty understanding boss and excuses Worf to take care of his son.
You are not the first officer on this ship to have a new family member.
Well, you and young Wesley Crusher. Who told you? After a meeting about warp surfing with Sully?
The wave will envelop the ship and push it into warp.
All right, Nate, just pretend for a minute that I don't really care about any of that stuff and cut to the chase, would you?
Troy corners Worf, which she does a lot in this episode, even in the turbo lift at one point, and guilt trips him into going on a field trip with Alexander, despite the fact that he has work to do. And she looks pretty damn pleased with herself. Yeah, ship security can wait. It's not like Odo's going to be laughing about lax Enterprise security in a few years.
They did not happen on the Enterprise.
Really?
The field trip consists of going to the biolab to look at various endangered species the Enterprise is transporting on board. And plenty of unattended models.
Models on the tables were for everyone to play with. So I guess you didn't know you weren't supposed to take them.
Chief of Security and number one dad Worf walks over to investigate Miss Kyle's accusation, interrogating the accused about the models.
Did you take the model of the lizard from the table?
No, sir.
Alexander, the ship's liar, ladies and gentlemen.
Alexander has acted shamefully.
Worf sits Alexander down for a talk about what he did and expresses his disappointment as well as talking about Klingon honor.
A Klingon's honor is more important to him than his life.
While Worf sitting Alexander down to talk about what he did is a good move, his approach is wrong. Talking about Klingon honor would only be effective if Alexander was brought up with Klingon values. But he wasn't. Kalar always thumbed her nose at Klingon ways, he spent the last year with his human grandparents, and Alexander even admitted later in the show that Kalar told him he didn't have to do any Klingon stuff if he didn't want to. Simply put, the concept of Klingon honor doesn't mean much to him. In a way, Worf's making the same mistake Picard made in The Enemy when Worf didn't want to donate his blood to a Romulan. Picard tried to convince Worf like he was another human and not a Klingon, and Worf's making very Klingon arguments to a kid that wasn't brought up in Klingon ways. Worf also tells a story to Alexander that when he was young, he lost his parents, family, and home, but the one thing that couldn't be taken away from him was his honor. And it's a very Worf speech. If you want to understand the character of Worf, this is a good speech to listen to. And honestly, it's not a bad story to tell Alexander. In fact, he probably should have told that story instead of going on about Klingon honor, since it's more of a universal story about the importance of honor and not just a Klingon thing. And finishing it off with the consequences of lying, that he dishonors his family and ultimately Worf, makes it impactful and relatable.
I won't do it ever again. I promise.
And that was a filthy lie!
And he seems to still have difficulty telling the truth.
You should never tell the same lie twice.
Miss Kyle starts off by saying while Alexander is one of her best students, his behavior leaves much to be desired. He's defiant, aggressive. Why does this sound familiar?
Aggressive. Adversarial.
I am not your enemy.
Worf tries to brush it off as Miss Kyle not having experience with Klingon children, until she brings up that he's lying again and lists a litany of lies. The proud father! Miss Kyle suggests they sit down with Counselor Troi. Yeah, like that's gonna help. But Worf heads off to the holodeck to find Alexander fighting Skeletor.
Listen, I am not nice, I am not kind, and I am not wonderful.
Worf points out that Alexander used his bat'leth in the holodeck without permission, to which Alexander responds that he's training to be a warrior like Worf wanted.
I don't want to be a warrior.
Worf then calls Alexander on lying to his teacher, to which Alexander claims that she's lying about him.
You must think me a fool to make your lies so transparent.
Worf, believing he's failed as a parent, decides to send Alexander to Klingon school and sends him to their quarters. Alexander says that Worf promised to take him to see the Gilvos again, but Worf rescinded on that promise. Worf sits down with Deanna to discuss Alexander and that he's sending him to a Klingon school, and Deanna asks him if that's what he wants.
It is not a question of what I want. It is a question of what is best for the boy.
Remember what Helena said at the start of the episode?
You must do what you think is best for him. That's all a parent can hope to do.
While yes, we can all joke about Worf's questionable parenting choices, heck, I probably still will, it's hard to deny that he's trying to do his best to do what's best for Alexander in every decision that he's made concerning him. He sent Alexander to live with his parents because he needed a stable environment to grow up in. I know there are families on board the Enterprise, but because the ship is in and out of combat a lot and could explode almost at any time, it's not the safest place to raise a kid. Heck, the ship got hijacked by Ferengi a season later, and the head Ferengi points out that they're putting children in danger on the ship. And not only that, when Troi points out that raising a son alone could be a burden, Worf denies Alexander is a burden, but that he needs attention that he couldn't give. And at least on Earth, Alexander would have a stable home as well as parental figures in his adoptive parents who could give him the attention he needed. He also tries to teach Alexander how to behave on board the Enterprise, even if he's not initially successful at it. Heck, he even agrees to reschedule his personnel meeting to go on a field trip for Alexander. Worf is trying the best he can to do what's best for Alexander, as well as perform his duties as Chief of Security. And I think the majority of his mistakes comes down to inexperience. He only recently started being a dad to Alexander, who he didn't know existed until about a year ago, and spent most of that year living with his human parents, so it's not an unfair observation that while he's getting the hang of being a parent, he's making rookie mistakes. So because of that reasoning, I'm inclined to say that Worf isn't a bad father, just an inexperienced one.
You disapprove.
I'm not here to approve or disapprove of the way you raise your son.
Deanna, that's bullshit. Troy does make a good point, though. I know, shocking. About how Alexander felt about being sent away, and that not only had he lost his mother, who probably took him everywhere, but he also lost his father. Even if sending him to live with his grandparents was a good call, Alexander wanted to be near his father, which could lead to, as Troy puts it, some abandonment issues and the reason why he's acting up. Troy also points out that Worf too is dealing with the loss of Kalar, and that both he and Alexander have some healing to do, and maybe they should heal together. Of course, when Worf tries to talk to Alexander again with all this in mind, he doesn't get very far.
You don't care about me.
That is not true.
All you care about is your honor.
Well, yes, but that's beside the point. In mid-argument, Worf is called to the bridge to stop a runaway warp wave, which results in the Enterprise getting pretty banged up and Alexander getting trapped in the biolab with the Gilvos. Having only 3 minutes, Riker and Worf hurry to the lab where Worf develops super Klingon strength to open the burning lab to rescue Alexander. He's throwing debris around, he's lifting a beam that he and Riker couldn't lift 30 seconds ago, and he rescues his son.
Together!
There's no time.
Please! They'll die!
I'll save your cat.
And they narrowly escape the biolab in the nick of time. In sickbay, Beverly fixes up Alexander, who is suffering from minor smoke inhalation and a fractured tibia.
That's a bone in your leg.
Jeez, Beverly, could you sound any more condescending? Want to ask Alexander for a blood donation while you're at it?
It's not too late to change your mind.
After facing death, Alexander promises he'll be good at the Klingon school and will make Worf proud of him. But then again, does the word of Alexander the ship's liar really mean much?
Clever lad.
Worf, however, issues Alexander an even harder challenge. He can stay on the Enterprise with him. While it might not be easy for either of them, they can face it together. Alexander accepts the challenge, and the father and son reach an understanding as the episode comes to a close. And that was New Ground, and it's a pretty solid episode. This episode would have made a great start for an arc about Worf stepping up and learning how to be a dad, and Next Gen does explore that a little bit in future episodes, but because of the episodic nature of Next Gen, we don't see a whole bunch of growth in either Worf or Alexander. Heck, Alexander is only in 6 more episodes of Next Gen, and only makes 2 appearances in DS9. And let's not even talk about teenage Alexander. How was he more of a badass as a kid? While I already mentioned what I thought about Worf's parenting earlier in my video, I'll summarize it this way. While Worf isn't the Quadrant's greatest father and wasn't prepared for raising a son alone on the Enterprise, he was trying his best to do what was right for Alexander, as well as holding down a career in Starfleet. And because of that, I can't call him a bad father. Hey, at least he's not Ducat, am I right?
You don't like the dress?
The dress is fine. I don't like you.
A few moments later.
You can be so thoughtful.
I try.
So, what do you think? Is Worf a bad father? Did he do right by Alexander? What are some of the things he could have done differently? And what do you think of the episode New Ground overall? Please, leave comments below and discuss. As always, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Treknalysis. If you like what you see, why not give my video a like and subscribe to my channel? Tell your friends! Until next time...
Am I in trouble?
Yes.